Hello and welcome back to the Avoid the Tyrewall podcast. Today we're joined by a very, very special guest, Steph Wentworth. Steph, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
I am a commentator, mostly working in motorsport, but sometimes across other sports as well.
Very nice. So can you talk us through your journey into becoming a motorsport presenter?
My journey's been quite an interesting one. I don't think linear journey when it comes to getting into motorsport. I channel during lockdown because I was honestly so bored. And I didn't supposed to go on my year abroad to Brazil, and that got cancelled because of COVID. So I was talking about F1 because I just loved it and I wanted to kind of like talk about it. And that's exactly what I did. And then my kind of presenting away from that, there are producers that will watch YouTube and TikTok, and that's why I think it's so great creators who are like putting their things out there now, because it is a viable way to get them. Because I didn't know that I wanted to be a presenter. That I know there are a lot of people out there who have that as a goal. To start making content is a great way to start working towards. I didn't know that at the time. It just kind of like fell in my lap, and I'm so lucky that happened, because I do now, and couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. But yeah, it was quite unexpected at the time. Yeah, I'm just very grateful.
What do you think of the Charlotte Tilbury and F1 Academy collaboration?
Ooh, I think it's so good this morning. I think it's fantastic. I love the fact giving down these kind of stereotypes that are surrounding women in motor, one or the other. We don't have to be interested in cars or interested in makeup. There's a crossover between. There's just such a massive brand in that sphere of space anyway. I think it's a brilliant collaboration what F1 Academy is going to do, and who else they're going to partner with throughout what I hope is going to be a very long season.
Yeah, I when I first saw it, I think Huda Beauty would be so good. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. I don't know. But I think they'd be so good for like an F1 or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, you were saying about content creators and stuff. Do you think that the rise of content creators and so more and more accounts has made working in motorsports more difficult?
In question, I think there's a yes and a no to it. I think it's made it people to find, for the people working in motorsport to find people what they are looking for, and to find them, because otherwise no one would have found me. I wasn't. And I think the thing is, it's really difficult to be a presenter anyway, because you need to have evidence, to have experience for them to want to hire you. Aspect for someone like presenter, or if you want to be a content creator, if you want to work in social media, there's so many avenues. But on the other hand, I do think it's really saturated now. So I started making content. There weren't many women talking about F1, especially I was in a very privileged position at that time, where there was a more looking for diversity, and it just so happened that I was able to fit that narrative that the F1 was really trying to push on, and all of that. So I was very lucky. I think I came in a unique time. But nowadays, it's a lot more difficult. I think there is a massive saturation of the space. You go on TikTok, there's so many different accounts that are doing. Yes, everybody has something unique about them, and it's great to see everybody's personality shine through. It's a lot harder because there's so much of that very similar content. But I do a very competitive space, but there's room for everybody. There's lots of jobs up and down on motorsport in a wider sense, and I do think there is for everybody to get in there, you know, and everybody brings something different to the table. Harder to be seen and stand out necessarily nowadays, but I do also think there is a rise in looking for these content creators and looking for people who are good creative. There's definitely far more available on that aspect of things nowadays. Everyone used to be like, no content creators, and don't use any of our footage, don't use any of our, we used to get our videos taken down if we put on any race footage. Now, far more harsh on that. You're not supposed to use race footage, but they've increased the access paddock now making content, which is so crazy. So there is a massive change, difficult one. I do think making content is great. I think it's fabulous, and it will always so many avenues that it could open up. It's just, yeah, it's a very saturated industry.
You mentioned Spanish A level. Do you think the fact that you're multilingual has contributed to your success?
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah. So my first job essentially was back in 2021. F1 had a back-to-back race schedule in Portugal. And this was kind of while it was still under very COVID restrictions. And one thing that F1 do is when you're at the track, they have like, if you're in a place with English predominantly, they'll have somebody at the track who does track TV and that language. So Spain and Portugal were back to back. It was set to be in April of 2021. All of these talks with F1, and they were like, we want to have you out, like you're gonna do that job. Great. Love it. And then all of a sudden, like Spain and Portugal were back, so nobody was going to be at the track, and so that job for me was like wiped out because there was nobody to attend. So that was like so disappointing for me because I was so excited. Like that was going to be my first talking in Spanish, talking in Portuguese, and I was genuinely so excited for it. But it just so happened that the circumstance, it didn't work out because of lockdown. But then a few months later, I actually ended up going, and that was my first race with F1, and I was using the Portuguese there. So it did come around. I don't think I would have got as many opportunities as I have if I didn't speak those languages. I definitely think this is so valuable. But it's not the only thing that can set you apart. You know, multilingual is a massive asset to like my job and my roles. But there are so many other things that other people can do who are in this role. So yeah, I'm not going to be on F1 TV, but there are so many other people who completely understand that, they have that background, they bring that to the table. So yeah, I think it's all about finding something that makes you unique and just happen to be that.
Is there someone that you've had to interview that you've fangirled over?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I've like done big drivers. I don't think so. I don't know. It's a weird, really thought like, oh, this is so crazy. Like, I can't believe I'm interviewing F1 drivers. But I don't know. They're kind of really normal. They were just like pretty. And once you're in that headspace where it's almost like, yeah, I've got a job to do, to kind of detach them from, I don't know, once you kind of see them and meet them, it's to being like, oh, they're this massive person that I'll never speak to. I don't know, it's a weird one. So even though I've done big ones, Daniel, like Lando, all of these big drivers, but they're actually just like really nice, like a little chat, and they're honestly just so sweet. And then no, not that it's no one big, like no, I think one person I would fangirl over is Patrick Dempsey. A WEC team, and he was at the 24 Hours of Le 3, and I never, just didn't happen. I don't think his team did very well in the end. Ended up speaking to him, but I do think that he is somebody that I would like fangirl over because I love Patrick Dempsey. And if I saw him, I don't know. I don't know what I'd do. I think that is top of the list. I'll have to track him down somewhere and interview him because I don't know. We'll see how it works out.
Who do you think will take over the vacant Mercedes seat in 2025?
Kimi Antonelli.
Yes, thank you. I interviewed him a couple years ago. He is insanely talented. I will write about this. I will talk for days.
I'm gonna do a whole video on this because people are like, oh, it might be Alex Albon, Fernando Alonso. I was like, be any of those drivers, okay? Like, it's just, I think Mercedes are really gonna go. Maybe they should go bold in 2025, and for me, that's the biggest indicator that they're gonna go. So, in reality, he's probably gonna do a great job in F2 this year. He's already got enough super license points to jump up into Formula 1, which he will in August. Yeah, I think it's cut and dry.
Honestly, like the fact that he's done F3 and in the rain he was seconds quicker than everyone else is like you do realize how difficult that is because people were like, no, he's too young, he's too young. Admittedly, he's my age. As someone who's presented for Elms and F1, would you say the atmospheres are completely different or are they similar?
So different. With F1, it's pinnacle of motorsport. It's a very strict note. You don't get into the paddock without tons of background checks and things that you need. Yeah, it's very, very strict and whatnot. And that is the biggest difference that I have with like ELMS and WEC. You can walk up and down the pit lane and like jump into a garage, and then people will be like, oh, hi Steph, how's it going? Like, do you want to, it's like scalding hot. So they'll be like, hey, have a water. And then all of the greens on their board. And so yeah, I'm just jumping in and out of, and you'd never have that in Formula One. Like you can't just be walking up and down the pit lane, jumping all of a sudden, like going into Red Bull. It just doesn't work like that. Whereas in ELM, go up and down the pit lane. Some garages can be a bit like, oh, keep your distance, about building those relationships. I love both of the atmospheres. You know, F1 is like circus and it's so nice to be involved, but they do keep you very. And I think what's really interesting about ELMS and WEC is that you don't have to be at that arm access. And it's the same, it's not just for me as the pit lane reporter. You have so much more at ELMS and WEC as a fan. They do this, my favourite thing that they do at the weekend, an autograph session where they basically like open up the pit lane. All of the drivers, you can just go and get whatever signed, and you can go and speak to any of the drivers, which is amazing. Incredible drivers in all of these series. So if you have like driving in one of those, you can genuinely have like a lovely conversation with them. Get you do a grid walk as well, where like fans can genuinely just go on the grid. There's 42 cars and you walk up and down. The drivers are there, the mechanics are there, and they're all just prepping for the race. And they get that in Formula One. You know, the people who go on the grid are the big famous celebrities. And yeah, the media does go onto the grid, but it's also really nice for the fans to kind of have. You never get that in Formula One. As just a regular fan, you'd never be able to just go on the grid. And that's absolutely a reason for that. It is a lot. You can't have, you know, hundreds of thousands of fans pouring onto the. But yeah, I just think it's something so different for ELMS, and I love it. It's really, it brings it really close to the fans, and I just think that's amazing.
Yeah, you were saying about the pit walk, the signing and stuff. I go to the British GT quite a lot, and they have that there. I love
Same
racing.
thing.
Yeah. What do you think sets F1 apart from other motorsports?
Oh, I think the glamour of F1 appeals to it because it's definitely the most glamorous motorsport I've ever seen. It's not glamorous. Outsider's perspective, it looks real glamorous. From an insider's perspective, when you're working there, it's it's a lot long days. Yeah, it's but I think that's what sets it apart because other motorsports, I don't think glamorous. I think, yeah, there are aspects where they want to hype it up and make it into a show, but I do think they're unattainable perception to it where it's like, we're at the top, no one can catch. To an extent, like, I definitely think that that's the case. You know, it is the pinnacle of motorsport for a reason. It's got the best racing of everything, but I do think it has the best kind of overall package. I'd love to see a title fight in F1 again. You know, that's when we see the title fight, when we see drive really competitively, that's when F1 is at its best. It's so fun to watch involved. I just think when F1 is at competitive, it is a top sport. But it definitely has this aura of I'm at the top, if you get what I mean. But I think, I don't know, I love F1. It will always be my first love. Yeah, there are things it could definitely do better.
Do you think that the prestige of F1 makes it more difficult to present?
Yes, definitely. The likelihood that you'll present Formula One is slim. There, well, first and foremost, many broadcasters. F1 licenses out to Sky Sports, like DAZN in Spain, or all of these channels, and so it makes it really limited for the amount of people at job because people just don't have the licensing agreements. And one thing is, if you're in the paddock, you cannot film in the paddock. So one thing is like BBC every Formula One race in a year, they sometimes don't actually, like, they're not allowed to film on site. It's really who's allowed to film where and what. So it's really scarce there, and I've fallen into that because in reality, there's not the situation is that Formula One as your first job. Like me having that is so unheard of. It doesn't happen because they want someone who they're like sure of, who has and if you look at the Sky presenting team, they've presented with Sky Sports before she was on the F1 team. I think she did like darts before, and she's a very well established presenter. It's the same with like Rachel Brooks as well. To those teams is really difficult just because Formula One is top, and at the on Formula One that you can't risk having somebody with less experience or somebody who you don't trust, and that's such an interesting part of it, and I do think it makes it really difficult to be a presenter, for example. But I do think I've always said it's a lot easier to be a presenter in other I just always say like be realistic because I tell my story and I'm like, oh, this job's was like working for F1, and that's insane. Like that in reality, that just doesn't know. You have to kind of like build your way up through other sports, maybe. That Sky's available for other sports as well. They would never just like hire a nobody to just on Formula One. Um, it's a really difficult in that space, and it's just because F1 restrict their broadcasts so to everybody else that there's just not that many jobs like presenting jobs in the actual F1.
How do you prepare for race weekends that you're working at?
Ooh. One.
Any. We could do separate. We could like branch off.
Ooh. Well, I love all of the race weekends. Like F1 is a 4-day weekend, and I think that's exactly what's going to happen each weekend. Really fun. You get so much more access to the track. Like if you want to do like a big track walk, fire. This year I am planning on like running the tracks, which I may regret my decisions. But for now, like that's a goal. Yeah, an ELMS race weekend is just kind of a lot more interest with F1 is once the race kind of gets underway in like an hour and a half, and it's like if you're doing endurance racing, like minimum 4 hours is spent kind of like your post interviews and everything. I don't know. They're really interesting. I think endurance weekends are a lot more work in terms of have to be on it for like the length of the whole race. So like 4 hours for ELMS, like maybe 6, 8, and then 24 hours of Le Mans is just like completely a complete yeah, it's they've all got great things about them. It's just kind of expect, but yeah.
While presenting F1, you often interact with drivers, team personnel, and fans. How do you balance providing insightful commentary while maintaining impartiality with professionalism and professionalism? Sorry, I cannot read.
Um, I mean, one thing that I always say is that everybody has bias. Everybody say like they're not biased. Everybody has bias, and I'm like, it's where that comes from. So I know that I have a bias towards Lewis, and part of that is because he's Lewis, like he is a black man in a very white dominated space. He's struggled with that from the Caribbean. He grew up in like a flourished area, I guess, and kind of like struggled throughout school. Can't relate to that part because I was quite affected. But in all of these in all of these ways, and Lewis's committee, I really relate to him, and I really really respect he does. I recognize that I've got a bias to Lewis, but I also recognize that other people will have bias to Lando, and I just think it's worth like acknowledging that too far in the other direction. Sometimes I think people are biased towards a driver, but because they don't want to seem as though they have that bias towards the driver, they'll go in quite hard on them. I just think it's about maintaining, you said, a level of impartiality. Sometimes it's just about asking what the race is, but I treat everyone way because they've all been polite, they've all been nice, and at the end of the day, you've got to talk to all at some point. You can't pick and choose which drivers you want, and it's all about giving them the grace as well that they'll be nice to you and that they will give you one. It's just a two-way street, really, because sometimes, as I mentioned before, they're like not so great experience on the track, but they like I don't want to have this conversation right now. Not in a bad, but it makes for a much better relationship because they're in them. They'll come to me when I'm ready, or I'll go back to them and check and see if they're ready. Kind of like finding that balance. I don't know. It's easy to have a level of impartiality, and I think it's most difficult in F1 because F1 was something that I was like a massive fan of this job as a presenter in motorsport. So ethical, but I say this all the time. I love all of the drivers. Like you could not make me hate a single driver. I'll be like everyone for first. everyone for the top step of the podium, which is a bit about how you're supposed to support someone when you actually support everyone. Like, there's 20 drivers, and I love them all. Everybody to do well, but only the top 10 can like end up in the points. So I think for me as well, it's easy to be impartial and things because I have a love of racing. I want to see, the drivers be competitive with each other. So I'm not opposed if I'm seeing good racing. Like, that's what I want to see, and I think that's an important thing to remember, is that like wanting one driver to do really well. I just love everyone.
Due to the fact that F1's a global sport with fans from diverse backgrounds, do you think you have to adapt your presenting style to cater for many audiences? Many different audiences?
Oh, interesting. For me, I like a presenting style that is quite light, like friendly. I feel like that's kind of my style, as a bubbly and out there. And I don't try to dumb that down. Like, I don't try to hide that as a presenter. Because you say that F1 is like a global sport, and it is a global sport. But when I think video about this, I remember in my content creation days, it's one of my favorite videos that I ever did. It's called no, that is one of my favorite videos. The video I'm talking about is F1 really a global sport? And I say that, and I'm sure I did this video in maybe 2021, maybe 2022. So it's a couple of years. But in that video, I talk about like whether or not F1 really is a global sport, because when you look at like F1 isn't that global. It's very Eurocentric, kind of getting a little bit more Americanized with the 3 races that we have in America. To me, they're very similar, like, cultures. And obviously, different places, there are changes in cultures, but overall, it's a very westernized, I'd say. And so when I look at F1 being diverse, I think it could definitely be more diverse, the places that we go to. And I've always said that. I really adapt my presenting style, because I think my style, and I love that everybody kind of has their own style with it. I try. My style is just to be welcoming, friendly, and clear. Everybody can understand what I'm saying. And one thing I always try and remember is it's not so much as I'm trying to remember that I'm appealing to people who are diehard fans but may not know a lot about racing. And so it's in that portray and try and come across quite clear, concise, and it feels like you're asking dumb questions, but you have to ask those questions sometimes to give the viewer the information that they need. So I do think F1 can be more diverse, but I don't think that I necessarily tailor my presenting style to different places that I go to. It's always interesting when I'm around people who speak foreign language. Try and be a lot clearer in my English and how I speak, just easier for them to understand. Because I know that learning a foreign language, like if you speak a little bit slower, and a lot easier for them to understand. That's what I want them to give me when I'm speaking in another language. I want them to talk to me clearly. And so that's what I always try and do. Everybody can understand me, but primarily it's English audiences that I speak to. I know I speak Portuguese, but yeah, it's primarily English people that I'm I'm presenting towards a clear, bubbly, friendly person I have, I think I'm all good.
What would you consider the most challenging part about motorsport presenting, and how do you overcome it?
The most challenging aspect is understanding what's going on all of the time. You can't understand what's happening all of the time because, for example, racing, if I'm up and down the pit lane and something's happened on the opposite side of the track, I can see a screen in front of me, and I'm not watching a screen the whole race, because sometimes there'll be a car that's in the pits maybe that's having work done, and I'm assessing what's going on. So it's easy to miss out on stuff. And also understand exactly what's going on. This is a big part of my job, is when a car comes into the pit lane, it's got damage or there's something wrong with the car and they're fixed. I can't always tell what they're doing because the mechanics will be running around and doing little bits and bobs. But what I'll try and do is I'll find a mechanic and ask what's happening. From seeing it, you can't always see what's going on. So I think as a woman, you have there's this expectation that you need to know exactly what's going on, and that's just not realistic. I try and learn as much as you've got to be aware as you're working and as you're going throughout the job. But yeah, soaking up as much information as possible, like doing as much research as you can, because for every eventuality, the more comfortable it is when you end up in. So yeah, I think it's a challenge to know things. There's so much that you don't know. An engineering background, I loved science as a kid, and like in GCSE, and into science in another world. But for me, I don't have all of that knowledge that the mechanics, fuel guys, all of those people in motorsport. But I've tried to learn so much about the tech stuff just so that I am clued up on what's going on. I think that's a challenge because motorsport is very technically driven, and so I don't think enter while knowing nothing about the technical regulations. So I like to be on top of like the tech changes and like what's going on with the and that's something that I find very difficult because I'm not that way for 3-4 years at university for like motorsport engineering.
Can you share with me a moment from your career that has stuck with you?
Ooh. I can give you a hilarious moment. And I think about this every time I speak Portuguese. So obviously the first time I was working with F1 in 2021, they were very aware, I was like a little bit more inexperienced. At that point, I'd done like a couple of races for and I'd done a couple of F1 esports. So, but that was like the extent of my presenting experience at that point. When I got to Brazil, they said, we're gonna bring people for you to interview. Necessarily have to like be on your own the whole time, and you'll have somebody else there. And I was like, thanks, F1. So who did they get for my first one? Felipe Massa, of course. So oh, this is so traumatic. So obviously, I'm really nervous. I don't tend to get nervous anymore, but at this one, I was pretty nervous because, in all honesty, I just. So I come into the paddock. It's Friday. It's practice day, and like I know that I'm with Felipe Massa for my very first broadcast up and down the pit lane, and I'm like, cool. So I'm like like making my notes as I always do, and like I'm going over and over again, and I'm thinking, God, is there any no in Portuguese? Because when you're at uni and you're learning a language, you're not learning you're not learning motorsport specific words. So I had to like go on like a big motorsport expedition to make. Anyway, Felipe Master comes in, and I'm still like furiously doing my notes. My Felipe Master, I was like, is it? Yeah, it is. So I go up and like in English because my producer doesn't speak Portuguese. So we're all speaking in English. And hi Felipe, like this is the presenter. Nice to meet you. And he says, are you English? He says in Portuguese. And I said, I am England. Sou Inglaterra. That means I am England. And I was like, no, what do you mean? You're not English. Thing I said to Felipe Massa. I am England in Portuguese. And I was like, this is not a good start and present to hundreds of thousands of Brazilian fans. And I just said, I am England. Anyway, I corrected myself immediately. And but it was genuinely, it was like such a traumatic event because I was like, how is that the first thing that I've just said to Felipe? And like, Felipe probably won't remember that this happened. But yeah, I like think back to that. It happened like 3 years ago, and I'm like, it's still like, it's
Would it be Soy de Inglaterra? Obviously, the Spanish accent really came through there.
soy inglesa.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, soy inglesa. I am, but apparently, soy Inglaterra. I am England.
In such an unpredictable sport, how do you ensure that you're staying up to date?
Oh God, it's really hard. It was easier when I didn't work in this sport because I'm for fun. Now, every time like I go on social media, like it almost feels like it's my job. But like social media, I think used to be very much. I'd go on it and it was an outlet. Whereas now I go on Twitter and it's all F1 news. It's what's going on in my job. So social media for me is not really like a relaxing thing. And I'll see F1 videos and whatnot. So to stay up to date, if you keep on top of things, I know that I have a very good memory. So if I read something once, like, but it's difficult because when I do my videos and stuff, like I always want to state sources, make note of the sources. But yeah, I think I'm lucky. You read something, you stay up to date. It's very easy to stay up to date because there's so many news sources now, each ones, because there can be some unreliable sources out there. It's hard but easy at the same time in this modern day.
Can you talk us through how esports is helping the motorsports industry?
Oh, I love this because I love esports. Okay, F1 esports and sim race closest esport that you can get to the real thing. Like when you're playing football, when you're playing like I don't know any other like when you're playing like shooting people, whereas like if you are playing a sim racing game, skills are transferable to real life racing. Okay, you might know, but there are ways to develop those skills. You know, the top esports drivers like Yana Ottmale, Lucas Blakely, they are all real world racers as well. Like they are sports, but those skills are transferable to real life racing. And this is why I love so much. I love that he is such a champion for esports because it's a far more into motorsport, and I have such a passion for it. And I'll say this: Max is more than people give them credit for because they both have this massive passion to help get into motorsports. Max just does it through sim racing, and Lewis does it diversity and making sure that underrepresented communities get the opportunity to and so they both have massive passion for it. And I do think that the esports route and such an interesting way for people to feel like they can be good at esports. You have no idea how that can translate to your racing sports drivers who want to do real world racing. And that's not to say that that's all you have to do, driver. You don't have to transfer into real world racing if you don't want to. It's an adrenaline rush without actually being on track and, you know, putting yourself in danger, because mostly dangerous. I love it. I think there's in there. I would just love to see a little bit more diversity. You know, I don't women in the esports and sim racing space, which is sad and unfortunate. Yeah, it's very male dominated at the minute. So I more women entering that space, and you know, look, I've got my wheel here. This year, I'm gonna get better at racing, but don't hold your breath.
Well, see, I'm the same. I have an Xbox and it's got the wheel and all that jazz. However, yeah, I mean, I'm 17 and I can actually drive a car. I've been doing driving lessons. I can drive. Put me on the Xbox, you'd think I have never sat in a car, let alone driven one. It's really humbling. When people tell you that they look up to you, how does that make you feel?
Oh, it's really nice. I do often get quite a lot of DM chance to reply to everyone, but I get a lot of DMs from people say that they've watched me for a while, or they love seeing what I'm doing. And just when I started my YouTube channel, I started it based on the fact that there was nobody talking about motorsport on the internet. There was people and very, very few women, and I tick both of those categories. So I wanted that there are people who look like me who are interested in motorsport eloquently about it. So that was my whole thing when I started my YouTube channel. That was exactly what I would see for people of all skin tones, of all teas, to realize that they belong in motorsport and tell me that they are inspired by me or they look up to me. I just think I would not be where I am on my journey without, you know, the people who have supported me. Yeah, honestly, I want to give back to those people. Like, I want to give back, and I want to give the people to achieve what they want to do as well, because even though I didn't intend to end up in the did, and now, like, I do feel that I have a responsibility to assist people who, I'm only 23, like, I'm very, very young in the context of, like, the motorsport industry, because we know it's, like, fully kind of like a middle-aged sport. Like, we haven't really seen a lot of younger sport, but now we are. And so I do think it's really important to kind of help nurture the so that they realize, you know, as we grow up, there is a place for you in this sport. You just gotta know where to look and then take it.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of the Avoid the Tyrewall podcast, and thank you to Steph for doing this interview. See you next week. Bye.